Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
It's Wednesday.
Here we are, and it's still February, but that's kind of crazy to think that it's already February of 2026.
Mardi Gras season down here in Mississippi.
I mean, I feel like that means that if it's Mardi Gras season, then it's getting close, or it already is crawfish season.
Yeah, I think so. Sounds right.
I like that.
I got to ride on my first float for one of the parades, and it was so fun. So fun.
Oh, I bet.
And I would love to go on and on about the best holiday ever in history, which is Mardi Gras in the Deep South, but we will hold that for another conversation because today we're going to be talking about bank robberies.
And it is very, I don't know, it feels very mobbish, very mobster, but not quite mobster. But it has some vibes to it.
Yeah, this case reminds me of one of my favorite movies, which is the Ben Affleck movie, The Town.
I don't know
that, Chelsea?
Mm-mm.
Where they wear the nun masks and they rob banks, and it's Ben Affleck and the other guy from the Marvel series. What's his name? Red Eye or something like that.
Okay.
Anyways, and also homegirl Blake Lively is in it too. Yeah, it's so good. And this case reminds me of it. And I think if I were to be a criminal, I maybe would be like a bank robber if I could get away with it.
Well, I think we've established that we would absolutely not be able to get away with it.
Dude, I don't get away with anything. Nothing.
Nothing.
Anytime I tried something, I got caught.
I know.
I learned early, preteens, that I was just like, I'm not even doing this fuckery because I will absolutely get caught and punished.
I know. But, I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens with these guys. I think I don't know, right? Like, I feel like most of you guys know that usually you're gonna get caught, right? Eventually.
Yeah.
I don't know, though. That would be an interesting stat to see how many people don't get caught, and how would you even figure that out, right? Like, because you're not going to admit to something, right? Mm-hmm. That, I don't know.
Yeah, but we are going to find out what an almost perfect bank robbery looks like with this case.
Yeah.
Because it literally was almost perfect.
It's pretty mind-blowing, all the setup, and it really, we'll go into it obviously, but yeah, I mean, it's dang near perfect.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting case, you guys, so buckle up. And without further ado, let's get into our good old bank robbing case.
Our setting is here in the U.S., 1950s, right? 1950, right at the beginning of the 50s, and the Second World War has been over for 5 years. And Boston is a city that's really caught between two worlds at this time. On one side, you have this American dream, post-war prosperity, the rise of the suburbs, and a sense that the law is finally winning. But on the other side, the old school underworld is still breathing. This is a world of smoke-filled social clubs and handshakes that mean more than contracts. The public is tired of the grit, and they want a legend. They want something that feels like a movie. And on a freezing Tuesday night in January, they got exactly what they were looking for. So tonight, we're looking at a time when a group of men decided to challenge the very idea of unbreakable.
Society in this era arguably was pretty obsessed with stability and order, especially just coming out of the war. We were building vaults that were supposed to be impenetrable and security systems that were built as future-proof. But there is a specific kind of darkness that grows when men feel like the system is closing in on them. At the start of 1950, a small group of men had been living a double life for 3 years, right under the noses of Boston PD and the FBI. They weren't looking for a quick score. They were looking for a way to prove that no matter how many locks you put on a door, the human mind is always going to find a way to be one step ahead.
What's interesting is that people still talk about this case today, not just because of the amount of money taken, but because of the silence that followed it. For years, there was nothing. No leads, no suspects, just a city looking at an empty vault and wondering how it was even possible.
Yeah, but every perfect plan, there is an imperfection lying underneath it. Tonight, we start at the beginning, before the masks, before the betrayal, and before the money literally started to rot.
On January 17th, 1950, a group of men walked into Brink's Incorporated building in Boston and walked out with the largest haul in U.S. history at that time. But the story didn't start that night. To really understand the heist, you have to understand the place that made it possible. This wasn't a group of strangers meeting in a dark alley. It really was a reunion in kind of a weird way. Almost every key player in this story was what the underworld called a quote-unquote Norfolk graduate. Now, I had to go and look this up, and I was today years old when I learned about any of this. This term, Norfolk graduate, refers to the people who went through the Norfolk prison colony, which in the 1930s and 40s was actually a radical experiment in prison reform led by a man named Howard B. Gill. It was located in Norfolk, Massachusetts, approximately 30 miles southwest of Boston. And it was built like a college campus. There were no bars on the windows of the dorms, plenty of communal spaces, and a heavy focus on self-government. So Howard Gill's philosophy was that if you treated men like citizens of a community rather than caged animals, they would learn to function in society.
What's interesting is Chelsea kind of spearheaded this case, and she had called me up and she was like, I am nerding out so hard. Have you ever heard about the Norfolk prison colony? And I was like, nope. And so she told me about it. And basically, she's going down the list, and it's like, instead of traditional big house style prisons with cement and steel, this prison colony had more of a dorm. It was more of a dorm style. They had house officers instead of guards, and the inmates had a council where they would vote on prison policies. And it was supposed to be this, luxurious rehabilitation setting that if you put people, and give them the rights, and they would do better and be better and all of this stuff. The problem is you had all of the criminals, so the most ambitious criminals, bank robbers in the New England area, all sitting together at the same tables to eat in the same workshops, and it gave them years to vet each other. So they were not serving time and learning, cognitive behavioral therapy. They were networking. And so when Chelsea asked me, she's like, what do you think the result of this experiment was? And I said, they just became better criminals. And she was like, yes. And so at this Norfolk prison colony, it really did make them better criminals. So better networkers. They figured out which men cracked under what kind of pressure, who would keep their mouth shut, all of that stuff. And so it was just ahead of its time. It didn't work. but it was the breeding grounds for essentially the guys in this case.
It was like a dream team, right? And you can almost see this heist that we're about to dive into. It was almost like this heist was their senior project, right? Like they were getting their master's degree in criminal behavior, if you will. They had time to discuss techniques. They shared stories of failed jobs. They built a hierarchy based on actual performance and reliability. By the time that these guys walked out of those gates, they weren't just a crew, they were pretty much an alumni network with a shared history of vetting each other under the unique conditions that this community provided. And this heist will start with one man, Anthony Pino, actually picking up one of the guys from the prison gates because he had done his research and he knew what type of guys he wanted on a team.
Now, this Anthony Pino guy, he is the undisputed mastermind behind this Brink's heist. And he was a man whose life is a testament to the quote-unquote long game. He wasn't in it for a quick turnaround. He was in it for the big payout, and he was patient. Pino was an Italian immigrant who never became a naturalized citizen and lived under the constant shadow of deportation due to having this record of petty and serious crimes. And so this status put him kind of in a precarious situation, and it likely fueled his obsession with having the quote-unquote perfect score. He was kind of obsessed with pulling off the perfect heist. Something that was so clean, it would provide the ultimate security for everybody involved, and obviously under no scrutiny. Now, in the kind of criminal underworld, Pino was revered as what they call a case man. And in the mid-20th century criminal underworld, if you will, a case man was a specialist in surveillance and tactical reconnaissance. So they weren't like the strong arms who provided muscle or the wheelmans who were the getaway drivers. A case man was the intellectual architect of the heist, and their job was to case a target. When someone is an excellent case man, like Pino reportedly was, they are effectively trying to reduce the world to a series of predictable variables. So basically, how do I work my way out of the obstacles to pull this off? And so Anthony Pino began looking at Brinks in like 1947, back when they were still on Federal Street in Boston. And this is why the Norfolk prison community graduates were his perfect team members, because they all came with different strengths. So if Anthony Pino was the brain, Specs O'Keefe was the iron will. He was a veteran criminal with a reputation of being cold. And so he was the strong arm specialist. He earned his nickname from the glasses that he wore, but he was focused entirely on the score. He was known for shaking down bookies and had kind of stone cold nerve that made him the natural choice to enter the team. And then you have, sorry for the pronunciation, guys, Stanley Gusiora, and he was O'Keefe's closest associate and a fellow, quote, heavy. Now, this dude was, again, another career criminal with a long history of burglary and armed robbery. And so Gusiora was a man of few words and significant action. He was also, like our buddy Specs, he was also a veteran of the Norfolk prison colony, and his life was a cycle of incarceration and high-stakes scores. And so his loyalty was primarily to Specs O'Keefe, and the two kind of became separable. So you can see from the start of these players how they all have a purpose, and, you know, they were all cogs in this wheel.
Next, we have Joseph McGinnis. And Joseph McGinnis was an influential figure there in the Boston area and also in the Boston underworld system. He was regarded as a veteran strategist who operated with a level of sophistication that really separated him from the average street-level criminal. He was a successful businessman, and he owned and operated a liquor store, and he also maintained a legitimate public profile while also simultaneously wielding significant authority within the organized crime circles. So he essentially had fingers in both pies, right? He was publicly known and respected, but he also was known inside of those crime circles. And his background was rooted in the Prohibition era, an experience that provided him with the connections and also the financial literacy necessary to manage a large-scale illicit operation. He was viewed ultimately as the, quote, elder statesman of his circle, a man whose age, resources, and calculated approach really made him the natural advisor and almost like the treasurer, right, for complex criminal ventures. Now, as you know from the movies, of course, every great heist requires a driver who can disappear in the city's veins. And for the Brink's gang, that was Joseph Banfield. And Banfield was a skilled getaway driver with a background in burglary. Rounding out the primary crew was Adolph Maffei. So Adolph Maffei, also known as Jazz, was a key member of the inner circle and a trusted lieutenant. The remaining members provided the necessary bulk and specialized eyes for the operation, right? You had Vincent Costa, which is Pino's brother-in-law, and he was the lookout guy. Henry Baker, and Baker was a veteran who had been released from the Norfolk prison colony 5 months before the heist. And that was the guy when we were talking about Pino picking up a guy from prison waiting at the gates. That's who he was picking up, was Henry Baker. Finally, you had the muscle, the grunt guys, and that consisted of James Faherty, Michael Gagin, and Thomas Richardson.
Now, you guys don't necessarily need to remember all of these names. It's just, it's a whole lot. There's a whole lot of guys involved in this, and they needed the getaway driver. They needed the strategist. They needed the finance guy. They needed the muscles. They needed the lookout guy. I mean, it reminds me of the movie The Town. If you guys haven't seen it, it's a fantastic movie. And so everyone has a very specific role to play. And so this is the dynamic that we're looking at, right? Pino isn't just the leader in all of this. He's almost like the relationship gardener in a weird way. So he's tending to the relationships, picking up associates from prisons, building a sense of like family amongst these men, right? Because he was smart, and he knew that you had to treat your guys good, right? You had to create that loyalty. They had even developed this pact, right? If anyone muffed or screwed up, they would be taken care of. And I think we all know what that means. So it wasn't even just like a group of guys wanting to get rich and go their own ways. This was essentially like a high-stakes business merger in the criminal side of things, where the penalty for failure was death. And this process of preparing for this ultimate heist created a pressure cooker, and it lasted for 3 entire long years.
As we've talked about, Anthony Pino, he spearheaded the operation. Now, this guy didn't believe in the smash and grab philosophy of his contemporaries. That's what a lot of people were doing, right? They were rushing in, throw your hands up. Everything was kind of messy and raw, but he didn't believe in that approach. He treated the heist like a scientific inquiry almost. So beginning as early as 1947, when, like Bailey said earlier, when Brink's was still located on Federal Street, Pino and his crew, which again was largely composed of these Norfolk graduates, began a period of surveillance that almost bordered on voyeurism. And I mean, obviously, we're not peeping Toms, but that's how closely they were watching everything and everybody. The Brink's building, or the Brink's Bank, would eventually move to a new location in 1949, and that would be at 165 Prince Street, and that is in the North End section of Boston. But surveillance really was only half the battle, right? You need a place to process that data. And for 3 years, the gang's primary war room was the liquor store in the neighborhood called Roxbury. It was the residential neighborhood that was about 15 or so minutes south of that Brink's North End location. And it was owned, again, as we talked about earlier, by Joseph McGinnis. This was the nerve center of the entire operation. So while 11 men ultimately were involved in the heist, these strategy sessions were restricted to the primary planners and the most trusted veterans, right? So you have Anthony Pino, Joseph McGinnis, Jazz Maffey, Vincent Costa, and of course, Specs and his buddy, Stanley. And they would meet there on an almost professional regularity, sometimes nightly as the date approached. And McGinnis, who was the elder statesman, would sit at the head of these meetings, acting as a buffer and the person who really put the strategy together, while Pino laid out the day's observations. So essentially, they were comparing notes.
I just want you guys to think about this. I mean, how disciplined these dudes were. I mean, they would gather in the back of liquor stores, cross-reference their notes, and they did this for months and months and months and months, for years. If Pino noticed a guard was 2 minutes late on a Tuesday, they discussed that as if it were a pattern or an anomaly. They even had secondary meeting spots, like at some of the members' houses in like Roxbury, where they could talk without the risk of maybe a customer walking in. And they did this for 3 years, okay? Most criminal enterprises break away in days and weeks, but it's important to note that Pino kept these dudes on a leash. He forced them to meet, they rehearsed, they analyzed until they were blue in the face, and they knew the building better than the people who worked there. They were effectively living the robbery long before they ever picked up a weapon. Now, what's really interesting about this is almost like muscle memory. You know, there's been some research, and I don't remember where or when or with whom or whatever, but basically practicing something like a dance in your head develops muscle memory for it. And these guys were doing this for years. It's just, I mean, it's actually quite honestly impressive. You know what I mean? It's illegal and it's criminal, yes, but their commitment is rather impressive.
Well, and what's crazy is, again, like the fact that they're comparing notes, and the notes that they're comparing is literally what they saw day in and day out, sometimes for hours at a time, just watching the area. The gang would occupy the roofs of nearby tenement buildings on Prince and Snow Hill streets. And from these vantage points, equipped with binoculars, they tracked the movement of every guard and the timing of every armored car. They learned when the lights went out, which windows were left unlatched, and the specific cadence, even, of the second floor money counting room. But their obsession, it didn't stop at just the exterior. If the surveillance was the science, the next phase was really just sheer audacity. The gang realized that no matter how much they watched from the outside, they needed internal access. So they started breaking in before the robbery.
But not even stealing anything.
No, they were not breaking in to steal anything. They would just break in so that they understood what everything felt like, looked like. And just the fact that they had the nerve to break in to a place, like, that's illegal in itself. And they did it multiple times. Over several months in 1949, they entered the Brink's building dozens of times after the employees had left for the day, and their goal was primarily the locks. On at least 5 separate occasions, they removed a lock cylinder from a door, including the main entrance on Prince Street. They would take the cylinder to a local locksmith whom Pino had paid to keep his shop open late. The locksmith would cut a key, and then the gang would rush back to the building to reinstall the lock cylinder before the morning shift arrived.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, this goes to show I'm not cut out to be a criminal, right? Because I wouldn't even really think of that. But, it's just not how my brain works. And that's the level that these guys were looking at. They didn't want to break into these buildings when it was time to actually rob it. They wanted to just literally have keys made. And then they would walk in, unlock the keys, bada bing, bada boom, in and out, right? And this level of risk is kind of crazy to me. To take it a step further, what Chelsea was saying is they would take that, cylinder out. That's the part that the key goes into. They not only took that out, and while they were getting a duplicate key made, they also put in a temporary decoy cylinder into the lock itself. So if anybody walked by, if a guard walked by or whatever, they wouldn't see that part of this lock was missing. So when I tell you that they crossed their T's and dotted their I's, that's exactly what they did. It didn't just stop there, okay? O'Keefe and Gusiora actually broke in to another company, a protective alarm company in Boston, just so they could steal a copy of the Brink's security blueprints. Because along with the locks, the other part of this heist that the team was kind of afraid of was the alarms in the building. And so they broke into this alarm company in Boston, stole a copy of the security blueprints. And when they looked at the plans, they realized they weren't helpful enough. And they were like, okay, so these aren't exactly what we need. We need a little bit more. They ended up breaking back into the alarm company to return the prints again, so no one knew what they were missing. So, it wouldn't create like, oh shit, these plans are gone. We need to notify Brinks or any of that stuff. So they broke back in, put it back. And they even considered sending a man to the U.S. Patent Office in D.C. just to research the patents on the specific alarms that the building that Brinks used. So they were literally treating this like a military operation. And it was, the goal was to make it perfect. They wanted it to be a perfect heist. And they even insisted on getting like a brand new getaway vehicle. But again, they didn't want anything to draw too much attention. So in November of 1949, what they ended up doing and what they decided on was they didn't want anything too new and they didn't want anything too old so it would break down. So they ended up stealing a 1949 green Ford stake body truck from a dealer near Fenway Park. And remember those trucks with like the wood plats on the side? That's one of the trucks that they stole. But they stole it months and months in advance so that when the time that the heist came, the heat would kind of be off of everybody looking for this stolen Ford truck. And so in the meantime, they are practicing their getaway routes over and over and over and over again. They are timing themselves, perfecting the turns, and ensuring that every man in this operation knew his place in the back of the truck. I mean, we're talking about they planned it down to the arrangements of who sat where in the truck locations.
I mean, if this thing had a written manual, I imagine it would look like one of those OSHA training books. You know what I mean? Just like pages upon pages of protocol.
For sure.
And they were so disciplined and they were so obsessed with having the perfect timing, right? That they aborted the heist at least a dozen times in the month leading up to January 17th. They would set a date, and if anything happened, anything that they did not like, even if the weather was not the way they wanted it, they would abort and wait. During that time, they would go through, it was like dress rehearsal. So Bailey and I grew up in the dance world, right? And you have dress rehearsals where you get in full-blown costume, right? And you perform the night before a recital or something like that. And that's what they would do. They would completely suit up, get in the truck, drive to the north end. But if a single detail was ever off, if there were too many people on the streets or the lights inside Brinks weren't just right, Pino would call it off, right? Vincent Costa was their eye in the sky, and he was stationed on the tenement the rooftop with a flashlight, and he would be the signal for the go or the no-go based on the conditions inside. They even did a false start on January 16th, the very night before the actual robbery, and that was a no-go. It didn't work out, so they were like, okay, this was close. We're planning to meet the next night, January 17th, in Roxbury, and that's what they did. So here we are. It's finally the night. January 17th, 1950. Approximately 7 p.m., the gang meets in Roxbury. 11 men are involved in the total operation. Banfield is at the wheel of the truck. In the back, there are 7 men: O'Keefe, Baker, Faherty, Maffei, Gusiora, Gagan, and Richardson. Pino is also in the back, and he's acting as the conductor, if you will. As they drive towards the north end, Pino starts handing out the uniforms, and these uniforms consisted of Navy-type pea coats and a chauffeur's cap. Then came the Halloween-type masks, and one of the masks was later identified as a Captain Marvel mask. And if anybody wants to know what Captain Marvel masks looked like in the 1950s, I highly recommend that you go and look up this little beauty, because that in itself can give you some nightmares.
We'll post pictures on the Instagram.
Yeah.
They remind me, because she sent me the pictures and I was like, those are terrifying. And she's like, oh, those were like children's Halloween masks in the 50s. And I was like, that's the scariest thing ever.
It really is. These guys put on gloves to ensure no fingerprints were left behind. And the wildest part of this outfit to me is to muffle their footsteps on the second floor concrete. They put on what is called rubbers, right? Which are kind of like these rubber overshoes. But one of the guys, Specs, he was actually wearing these crepe-soled shoes. And if you saw the soles, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But they're just they're solid soles, but they're kind of, I don't know, they look like crumpled up paper almost. But they're supposed to be for very quiet but very good traction. That's why they're made. They wanted to be as quiet as mice. Now, interestingly enough, this is where Anthony Pino steps away. All the guys are suited up. They're ready. Anthony Pino steps away. Pino goes up and he gets into a vehicle and he drives up to Joseph McGinnis's liquor store in Roxbury, making sure that while he's there in that, 10 to 15 minute drive, once he got there, he had a conversation with a cop. That way, if a cop could testify that Pino was 4 miles away buying a bottle of scotch while the guards were being tied up, then Pino wasn't there, right? He was bulletproof. So there the guys are. They're waiting in the playground. They're waiting for Costa to flicker his flashlight to give them the go. And that's what happened next. They got the go.
Shortly after 7:30 p.m., the 7 men walk into the Prince Street entrance. Remember, they've got keys. They use their keys, open the front door, step inside, and pull on their masks. They move through the building using the other keys they've made, because they made keys for every door of the building, and they head straight for the second floor. Inside, 5 Brink's employees are doing their nightly chores of storing the day's collections. And suddenly, right, because remember they had these super quiet shoes and they moved completely silently through this building. And suddenly these employees are startled and they're staring down the barrels of pistols held by masked men who have made 0 sound. They were so quiet that these employees never heard anything in the building. And so the team, the robbers, moved with their precision that they had rehearsed 1,000 times. They force the employees to lie face down, and they tie their hands with rope and then use adhesive tape to gag them. Then all of a sudden, a buzzer sounds, and it starts to make them panic just a little bit. And so one of the guys rips the tape off of one of the employees' mouths and asks him what that buzzer sound is. And the employee says, hey, it's a garage attendant who wants to enter the vault area. They're making a delivery. While they're trying to figure out what they do, the guy who was there to deliver to the building just gave up because nobody came to the door. So he just went back wherever he came from, leaving this literal heist, this robbery that is happening in live time, just kind of lets it happen. Isn't that nuts? So even though they kind of lucked out with that, it did kind of snag their confidence for the night because they just weren't expecting it. And it put a little bit of shake in their sturdy step. It made them move a lot faster. And then they tried to break into a metal box that was containing a General Electric payroll, but they forgot the tools. And so they kind of had to leave that one behind.
Now, this whole thing only takes 17 minutes. 17 minutes and they are done. And in that 17 minutes, they have stuffed bags with $1.2 million in cash and over $1.5 million in checks in 17 minutes. They even accidentally scoop up a pair of the employees' glasses into one of the money bags. They haul the loot down to the truck, pile in, and Banfield floors it, right? As they speed away, the employee manages to free himself and call the police. At this point, the perfect crime has been executed, and the gang heads for the home of Jazz Mafi's parents there in the Roxbury area to unload the loot. But as they start counting, the first crack in the perfect facade begins to show. The guy Gagan is terrified of his parole status, and he decides to bail out of the truck before they even arrive at the house to start building an alibi. So he's out, literally jumps out the back of the truck and goes. The heist is over, but the nightmare of keeping the secret is just beginning.
So as a side note, while Chelsea was doing her part, I had to look it up because I wasn't sure. But $1.2 million in 1950 is equivalent to $16 million today. $16 million. And remember, they left with 1.2 million, Chelsea, right, in cash?
In cash. And then another 1.5 in securities and things like that.
And so 1.5, hold on, you guys, I have to look this up because I'm so interested. 1.5 million is today 20 million. So we're looking at $36 million in 1950, okay? So that gives you kind of a psychological perspective of the intensity that these guys were working with. $36 million, that's a lot of money, right? And I think right after the heist, right, the reality starts to hit them pretty quickly because the high of it didn't even last them through the night. When obviously they left, everybody calls the police, and when the Boston police get there and they see what's going on, the FBI quickly gets involved. So almost immediately, Boston PD and the FBI start setting up roadblocks. And so the gang is in a basement in Roxbury, staring at this huge amount of cash, but they realize that they have this massive problem, right? How do you go about spending or even holding on to $36 million without getting caught, right? Most of the money was brand new and they were in sequential bills. And so they start kind of brainstorming. And so it's McGinnis, the elder statesman of the group, he was afraid that the FBI would start to track those serial numbers. And he told the men that they needed to age the money. And this is where things start to get a little interesting, and it shows up later in the case. They decide to hide the money. They attempted to launder it through the most primitive means possible. So there are stories that these guys would rub them with dirt and ashes and even place them in a tumbler to make it look circulated. What starts to happen is, you have these 11 men, right, who are all kind of arguably alpha personalities. And they're starting to kind of get pushed towards their limits. And they agree to split the money, but they don't do it all at once. Large sums are handed over to quote unquote trusted members for safekeeping. And I think we can all see what starts to happen from this decision is it starts to create a little bit of hurt feelings and classic paranoia from a lot of the members of this group. So for these men, this money was their only lifeline, and they didn't trust each other to really hold the line. And so we all know that you have all of these different personalities, these different alpha personalities, and now you've got trusted members of this safekeeping cache and other people are not. And that is where the very humanness of this starts to create the cracks and leads to arguably some of the bad decisions that blows this case wide on open.
Now, like Bailey said, the Boston PD is involved, but the FBI is also involved. And the FBI is interviewing thousands. They check every locksmith in New England. They're tearing through backyards of every Brink's employee. Yet, I mean, they can't find them. The gang remains a ghost, or a gaggle of ghosts, I guess you could say. They had built a fortress of airtight alibis, right? I mean, that was the whole reason why Anthony Pino hopped off and went up to Roxbury, was to make sure that an officer could say, yeah, I was chatting with them at 7:30 at the same time that this bank heist went down, right? And it would be physically impossible to put him there at the crime. So while these guys were working and had worked and created these airtight alibis, they really didn't take into consideration who was in charge of the FBI at the time. And maybe you guys will remember this name from your, history class, but the leader, or the what do you call him? The leader of the FBI, the director of the FBI, was J. Edgar Hoover, who would go on to be a president of the United States. So to Hoover, the Brink's job was a personal declaration of war. He was obsessed with the government men, or he called them the G-men, with this image of the FBI as infallible, right? They were an all-seeking, unstoppable machine. The fact that local hoods had vanished with nearly 3 million made the Bureau look human, and Hoover could not breathe until that image was restored. So he unleashes his G-men with a blank check, essentially. Like, it does not matter. Money is no option. You do whatever it takes to find these guys. This wasn't just detective work. It was a siege. Hoover demanded daily briefings and personally reviewed over 3,000 leads. For years, the investigation hit a brick wall. But the clock was the gang's only true ally. So here's the kicker of all this. In Massachusetts, the statute of limitation for bank robbery is exactly 6 years. As January 1956 approached, the gang members, they start to exhale. They are just days from being legally untouchable.
In that span of 6 years, other events happened that really started to make this perfect crime start to crumble. So Joseph O'Keefe, Specs, the strong man, he was a very rigid kind of criminal guy with a super rigid code of ethics. And while the rest of the gang was laying low, Specs, O'Keefe, and then Stanley Gusiora, well, they get bored, okay? They went to Pennsylvania and they were doing just petty, stupid stuff. And they get arrested, they get busted for small-time burglary. And now you've got the tough guys of the Brink's heist sitting in a jail cell in another state. And Specs expected his partners in Boston to take care of him, right? Like, we did this heist together. We don't turn on each other. This is almost like a family thing. He expected them to pay for this high-priced lawyers and to look after his family. But instead, what happened is the gang kind of turned their back on him, and the money stopped coming. He sent word to one of the other guys in the heist, Jazz Maffey, who was supposed to hold his share, which was nearly like $100,000. But Maffey told him that the money was gone, spent on legal fees and expenses. So O'Keefe already felt like he had been cut out, and he is like the nerve of these people to dish discard me like trash. And that is the humanness that really starts to break what would have been arguably like a perfect crime. You know what I mean?
Well, absolutely. So his feelings are hurt when O'Keefe gets out on bail in 1954. And probably because of that, assuming, he doesn't go into hiding, he goes on a warpath. He returned to Boston, not as a partner, but now as an enemy. He actually kidnapped Vincent Costa, which again is Pino's brother-in-law, and held him for ransom just to get his own money back. Like, imagine that scene. The man who helped pull off this crime of the century is now kidnapping his own accomplice's family. And the gang's response wasn't to pay him, it was to kill him. And so what do? They hire a professional hitman named Elmer Trigger Burke.
His nickname was Trigger. He would not last in 2026 because everybody would be like, Trigger. And he would be like, what? Yeah, so on a rainy night, June 1954. So remember what Chelsea said is the clock is ticking as far as like the heist, being untouchable after 6 years. So they've made it 4 years and they're starting to really find this trouble. And this is where things start to kind of flip for them. So this hitman Trigger ends up cornering Specs O'Keefe in Dorchester and unloads 30 rounds from a literal submachine gun into O'Keefe's car. Whether you call it a miracle or the luckiest day of his life, Specs O'Keefe survived. He was just hit in the wrist, in the chest, but crawled out of that car alive. And it was that moment where he realized that this kind of quote-unquote code of silence was a one-way street. He was now being hunted by the men he had protected for 4 years. Now, at this point, the FBI is starting to get what seems to be an understanding of this heist. Okay, they're starting to put together the names. Because, going back to the investigation, what finally cracked it open, kind of, for the FBI is when they found parts of that truck that the heist team had stolen. They found it in a dump in Staunton. And so what the FBI started to do is they started to see who lived in the area. And they found that 2 of the men lived in Staunton. And that is how the FBI started to kind of close in on the group that they think was behind the Brink's heist. So over the next couple of years, the FBI starts to kind of hone in on Specs O'Keefe. And they start badgering him for information. They start badgering him. And finally, what ends up happening is that Specs O'Keefe gets picked up by the FBI for a probation violation. And by this point, it's January 6th, 1956. It's only 11 days before the statute of limitation wears out. But O'Keefe is tired and he's pissed. And he finally sits down and he says, "What do you want to know?" And they wanted to know everything. And so Specs O'Keefe, the hardcore guy who would never turn, he starts to sing. He tells them everything. He tells them about the locksmith, the keys, the dry runs, and the name of every man in the truck.
Following the confession of Specs O'Keefe, the FBI moved simultaneously to arrest the men who had spent 6 years living as free men. On January 12th, 1956, the FBI arrests 6 men just 5 days before the 6-year statute of limitation would have expired. Now, they were all taken in at the same time to avoid any sort of tip-offs. Anthony Pino and Vincent Costa, Joseph McGinnis, Jazz Maffey, Michael Gagan, and Henry Baker. While the others were being processed, James Faraday and Thomas Richardson vanished. So they got 6. They didn't get all of them. Their disappearance earned them spots in the FBI's 10 most wanted list, sparking a nationwide search that lasted 4 months. Faherty and Richardson run did finally end in June of 1956. Acting on a tip, FBI agents surrounded a nondescript apartment in Dorchester, which is a neighborhood just south of Roxbury, and the agents found the 2 fugitives hiding in a small, cluttered flat. Unlike the glamorous crime of a century they had participated in years prior, their lives on the run had been reduced to a cramped apartment and constant paranoia. The most striking detail of their capture was the discovery of $5,000 in coins. Now, you might be thinking that if you stay hidden, because this was the thought I had, if you stay hidden until June of 1956 and the statute of limitation has passed, right? Doesn't that mean that they beat the clock, right? Like, after all, January 17th is the deadline, and that had long passed since the FBI kicked in the Dorchester door. So how exactly does that happen? So that is actually, I again had to look this up. It was a classic outlaw myth. The idea that if you just stay under the radar long enough, then the law has to let you go. But in reality, once the grand jury handed down the indictments on January the 12th, the clock stopped. Legally, they were already quote unquote caught. The FBI just had to find out which room they were sitting in.
Reminds me of the people who are like, I know my rights. And it's like, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. So after all these dudes were arrested, the trial began on August 6, 1956. So 6 years since the time that at the time was the biggest heist robbery in U.S. history. So this was the biggest of the biggest deals. So the trial starts and it lasts a couple of months. It was obviously a really big undertaking for the Massachusetts judicial system. They wanted to make sure that they crossed their T's and dotted their I's. The proceedings took place in the Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston, and because of the high stakes, the courtroom was packed with reporters from all over the country, waiting to see if the, quote, perfect alibis would hold up. Pino, McGinnis, Maffei, Gagan, Baker, Costa, Faherty, and Richardson, they were tried as a single group in a mass trial. Strategic move by the prosecution to show that it wasn't just a series of random acts, but it was a highly organized conspiracy and heist. Then you have Stanley Gusiora. Now, he had actually died a month before the trial from brain swelling and pneumonia, so he wasn't there for that trial. So it was just O'Keefe. The prosecution's entire case rested on Joseph Specs O'Keefe's testimony. And for days, the courtroom heard all of the details in every minute of the 3 years of planning for this heist. He described the war room meetings in Roxbury liquor store, the rooftop surveillance, and even the exact brand of Halloween masks that they bought. Of course, the defense tried to paint Specs O'Keefe as a rat and a vengeful liar, but O'Keefe had receipts. He knew details about the interior of the building that nobody else could have known unless you were a part of the heist.
On October 5th, 1956, after the jury deliberated for only 3.5 hours, the verdict came back. And it was guilty on every single account. So the initial 6, Pino, McGinnis, Maffei, Gagan, Baker, and Costa, they got life in prison. The fugitives, Faherty and Richardson, they also got life in prison. Now, because Specs O'Keefe worked with the FBI, he got 4 years and was actually released in 1960. Now, I don't know. If you notice a pattern like I did, you might see that it doesn't really matter if you stay at home in your slippers like Pino or hide in a cramped flat with 5,000 in heavy coins like Faherty. The result usually ends up being the same, which is life in prison. The only man who walked away with this freedom in sight was Specs O'Keefe, which was the man who essentially burned the whole house down just to save himself. For the rest of the crew, the crime of the century ended exactly where it began, behind the bars of a Massachusetts prison. The years of planning, the crepe sold shoes, the mask, the $1 million dreams, all culminated in a life sentence.
So I know everybody here is wondering, okay, but Bailey, where's the money? What about the money? That's the thing. Of the $1.2 million in cash, only a fraction has ever been recovered to this day. The FBI knew the money hadn't been spent. It was too much too fast. But what they ended up finding out is in June of 1956, in Baltimore, a small-time criminal tried to pass off a $10 bill at an amusement arcade. And the cashier was like, this bill looks weird. It's off. It's not counterfeit, but it's like falling apart. And when people searched this dude, they found over $1,000 in similar bills. And he eventually pointed the FBI back to Boston to an office used by the name of Fat John Buscelli. And this is where, it's there's so many turns in this whole case, but it's one of the most evocative images in criminal history. The FBI went into that office, literally ripped the walls apart, and inside a partition in the walls, they find this picnic cooler. And they found stacks of literally moldy, degrading cash. There was about $52,000 in there, but the money, again, was quite literally rotting. It had been buried in the ground in a canvas bag, probably with like sand and ashes, and then it was moved into the wall. But the bills were like completely useless. They were falling apart, and it's just so interesting to me that is kind of the end to what would have been this perfect heist. It makes me think of, I don't know if you guys have seen the kids movie Bad Guys with the wolf and the tarantula and the piranha. But one of the things, especially in Bad Guys 2, that Wolf says is it's never just about the heist. It's the power move behind it. And I think that's true, right? Like, especially in this case, I mean, these guys didn't spend all of this money. And it's just nuts to me. It is just crazy that it boils down to very human issues, human psychology, and very human things that collapse this entire case.
Yeah, there are all sorts of conspiracies, right, on where the money is. And nobody really knows, right? They were able to find, like Bailey said, like 52,000 of it, and it was literally decomposing. There are legends that some of it is buried in the dunes of Cape Cod or, hidden under the floorboards of the old North End tenants, But I don't know, more likely it was probably, they probably paid Trigger for the hit on O'Keefe, and then they probably spent the rest of it as hush money for the families. So after all this was said and done, Joseph McGinnis, he ended up dying in prison in 1959, just 3 years into his life sentence. Anthony Pino, he was actually paroled in 1971 and died as a free man in 1973. Jazz was paroled in the late 60s and he died in the 70s. Vincent Costa was paroled and lived until the late 1980s. And Michael Gagan was paroled and lived until the mid-90s. Like, he was one of the last surviving guys. And then James Faraday and Thomas Richardson were both fugitives that were paroled in the early 70s. And then, like we said, Specs was only in there for 4 years. He was released in 60, but then lived another 16 years in hiding before dying of natural causes. But kind of what I wondered at all of this, like when I saw that these guys all were paroled at various times, I was like, why did it go from a life sentence to really like 20 years maybe type of thing? So interestingly enough, by the late 1960s, the Brink's men were seen as quote unquote old school criminals and weren't considered a violent threat to the public anymore. And I thought that was kind of interesting that they were just like, oh, those are like, meh, that's like child's play. We got real criminals now. And again, I just think that this is the craziest story, all of it, right? Like the time that they spent putting it together, the fact that it crumbled really so quickly, right? Like there was really no highlight in it. It just happened and then it turned into chaos. And then none of the guys even had to serve life. Like what a bizarro turn of events.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know, you guys. It's just weird to me that you go through 3 years of planning a heist this big and you don't even like book a flight to a country that doesn't do extradition and like live your best luxurious life. Like, I don't know. It's probably what I would do.
Like, why didn't you put it in some Swiss bank account? You know,
That's what I
like
mean.
maybe they didn't know. Like maybe that was one of those things, like they truly didn't know that was an option. But yeah, the fact that they literally planned, like you said, all that time and they're like, well, now what do? We literally don't know how to spend this much money without someone figuring it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it goes back to there was I don't know, a social experiment done. I don't remember his name, but basically this guy had an idea and he was just like, does money change people's lives? Is it enough to change people's lives? And he found a homeless guy and the guy who did this experiment, if you will, the social experiment, said that they couldn't be addicts and they couldn't have like major mental health issues, like to be fair. And he found this homeless guy and gave him what would have been like life-changing money. He gave him $100,000. And basically, long story short, the guy within a year blows all of it and is back on the street. And, you know, there's a lot of people that critique it and stuff, but I think money is a mentality. Relationship with money is a mentality. And I think sometimes people really don't know what to do when they have too much of it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had not heard the story. I had no idea that this was, you know, for its time, the biggest bank heist ever. Like I said, you guys need to check out those masks because hot dog, that things that were considered cute and fun in the 50s were quite terrifying. Easter bunnies, Santa Clauses, Halloween masks of Captain Marvel. It was all horrifying.
And maybe they say there's still $1.1 million missing and unaccounted for.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll just start digging holes up there in the Northeast area in Boston. Yeah. Might find
that area.
Bags of molded, completely rotted money. I don't know if what would be worse is just like never finding it or finding it and then it just completely crumble in your hands.
Yeah. It's like the fourth verse of the Alanis Morissette song. Isn't it ironic?
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, well, as always, you guys, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy heist of a ride.
And we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.